Happy Friday! Last installment of the week for my side of the mountain. We're about halfway through the book already. And yeah, if you like it, leave me a comment. If you would like to have more books like this, kind of nature-oriented books, I have lots and lots. If you have any ideas on other books you'd like for me to read next, go ahead and put the word out there so I can start thinking about it. I've got some in mind, but I am totally open to suggestions. So let's get right back to this. Let's see. He was going to make a fireplace out of clay, and I bet he does. Let's see what he does here. It took 3 days to get the fireplace worked out so that it didn't smoke me out of the tree like a bee. It was an enormous problem. In the first place, the chimney sagged because the clay was too heavy to hold itself up. So I had to get some dry grasses to work into it so that it could hold its own weight. I whittled out one of the old knot holes to let the smoke out and built the chimney down from this. Of course, when the clay dried, it pulled away from the tree and all the smoke poured back in on me. So I tried sealing the leak with pine pitch, and that worked all right. But then the funnel over the fire bed cracked, so I had to put wooden props under that. The wooden props burned, and I could see that this wasn't going to work either. So I went down the mountain to the side of the old Gribbly farmhouse and looked around for some iron spikes or some sort of metal. I took the wooden shovel that I had carved from the board and dug around what I thought must have been the back door or possibly the woodhouse. I found a hinge, old handmade nails that would come in handy, and finally, treasure of treasures, the axle of an old wagon. It was much too big. I had no hacksaw to cut it into smaller pieces, and I was not strong enough to heat it and hammer it apart. Besides, I didn't have anything but a small wooden mallet I had made. I carried my trophies home and sat down before my tree to fix dinner and feed Frightful. The evening was cooling down for a frost. I looked at Frightful's warm feathers. I didn't even have a deer hide for a blanket. I had used the two I had for a door and a pair of pants. I wished that I might grow feathers. I tossed Frightful off my fist, and she flashed through the trees and out over the meadow. She went with a determination strange to her. "She is going to leave," I cried. "I've never seen her fly so wildly." I pushed the smoked fish aside and ran to the meadow. I whistled and whistled and whistled until my mouth was dry and no more whistle came. I ran onto the big boulder. I could not see her. Wildly, I waved the lure. I licked my lips and whistled again. The sun was a cold, steely color as it dipped below the mountain. The air was now brisk, and Frightful was gone. I was sure that she had suddenly taken off on the migration. My heart was sore and pounding. I had enough food, I was sure. Frightful was not absolutely necessary for my survival. But I was now so fond of her. She was more than a bird. I knew I must have her back to talk to and play with if I was going to make it through the winter. I whistled. Then I heard a cry in the grasses up near the white birches. In the gathering darkness, I saw movement. I think I flew to the spot, and there she was. She had caught herself a bird. I rolled into the grass beside her and clutched her jesses. She didn't intend to leave, but I was going to make sure that she didn't. I grabbed so swiftly that my hand hit a rock and I bruised my knuckles. The rock was flat and narrow and long. It was the answer to my fireplace. I picked up Frightful in one hand and the stone in the other, and I laughed at the cold, steely sun as it slipped out of sight because I knew I was going to be warm. This flat stone was what I needed to hold up the funnel and finish my fireplace. I guess Frightful to the rescue again. And that's what I did with it. I broke it into 2 pieces, set one on each side under the funnel, lit the fire, closed the flap of the door, and listened to the wind bring the first frost to the mountain. I was warm. Then I noticed something dreadful. Frightful was sitting on the bedpost, her head under her wings. She was toppling. She jerked her head out of her feathers. Her eyes looked glassy. "She is sick," I said. I picked her up and stroked her, and we both might have died there if I had not opened the tent flap to get her some water. The cold night air revived her. "Air," I said. The fireplace used up all the oxygen. I've got to ventilate this place. We sat out in the cold for a long time because I was more than a little afraid of what our end might have been. I put out the fire, took the door down, and wrapped up in it. Frightful and I slept with the good frost nipping our faces. Notes. I cut out several more knotholes to let air in and out of the room. I tried it today. I have Frightful on my fist watching her. It's been about 2 hours, and she hasn't fainted, and I haven't gone numb. I can still write and see clearly. Test. Frightful's healthy face. Next chapter, in which we all learn about Halloween. October 28. I have been up and down the mountain every day for a week, watching to see if walnuts and hickory nuts are ripe. Today, I found the squirrels, all over the trees, harvesting them furiously. And so I have decided that, ripe or not, I must gather them. It's me or the squirrels. I tethered Frightful in the hickory tree while I went to the walnut tree and filled pouches. Frightful protected the hickory nuts. She keeps the squirrels so busy scolding her that they don't have time to take the nuts. They are quite terrified by her. It is a good scheme. I shout and bang the tree and keep them away while I gather. I have never seen so many squirrels. They hang from the slender branches. They bounce through the limbs. They seem to come from the whole forest. They must pass messages along to each other, messages that tell what kinds of nuts and where the trees are. A few days later, my storehouse rolling with nuts, I began the race for apples. Entering this race were squirrels, raccoons, and a fat old skunk who looked as if he could not eat another bite. He was ready to sleep his autumn meal off, and I resented him because he did not need my apples. However, I did not toy with him. I gathered what apples I could, cut some in slices, and dried them on the boulder in the sun. Some I put in the storeroom tree to eat right away. They were a little wormy, but it was wonderful to eat an apple again. Then one night, this was all done, the crop was gathered. I sat down to make a few notes when the Baron came sprinting into sight. He actually bounced up and licked the edges of my turtle shell bowl, stormed Frightful, and came to my feet. "Baron Weasel," I said, "is it nearing Halloween? Are you playing tricks or treats?" I handed him the remains of my turtle soup dinner and, fascinated, watched him devour it. Notes. The Baron chews with his back molars and chews with a ferocity I have not seen in him before. His eyes gleam, the lips curl back from his white pointed teeth, and he frowns like an angry man. If I move toward him, a rumble starts in his chest that keeps me back. He flashes glances at me. It is indeed strange to be looked in the eye by this fearless wild animal. There's something human about his beady glance. Perhaps because that glance tells me something. It tells me he knows who I am and that he does not want me to come any closer. The Baron Weasel departed after his feast. Frightful, who was drawn up as skinny as a stick, relaxed and fluffed her feathers, and then I said to her, "See, he got his treats, no tricks." Then something occurred to me. I reached inside the door and pulled out my calendar stick. I counted 28, 29, 30, 31. Frightful, that old weasel knows. It is Halloween. Let's have a Halloween party. Swiftly, I made piles of cracked nuts, smoked rabbit, and crayfish. I even added 2 of my apples. This food was an invitation to the squirrels, foxes, raccoons, opossums, even the birds that lived around me to come have a party. When Frightful is tethered to her stump, some of the animals and birds will only come close enough to scream at her. So Bird and I went inside the tree, propped open the flap, and waited. Not much happened that night. I learned that it takes a little time for the woodland messages to get around, but they do. Before the party, I had been very careful about leaving food out because I needed every mouthful. I took the precaution of rolling a stone in front of my store tree. The harvest moon rose. Frightful and I went to sleep. At dawn, we abandoned the party. I left the treats out, however. Since it was a snappy gold-colored day, we went off to get some more rabbit skins to finish my winter underwear. We had lunch along the creek, stewed mussels and wild potatoes. We didn't get back until dusk because I discovered some wild rice in an oxbow of the stream. There was no more than a handful. Home that night, everything seemed peaceful enough. A few nuts were gone, to the squirrels, I thought. I baked a fish in leaves and ate a small, precious amount of wild rice. It was marvelous. As I settled down to scrape the rabbit skins of the day, my neighbor the skunk marched right into the campground and set to work on the smoked rabbit. I made some Halloween notes. And here's a picture of a wild potato. Doesn't look much like a potato, does it? More like just a weird shaped root. Kind of looks like a dinosaur shaped root. Here are his notes, his Halloween notes. The moon is coming up behind the aspens. It is as big as a pumpkin and as orange. The winds are cool. The stars are like electric light bulbs. I am just inside the doorway with my turtle shell lamp burning so that I can write to see this. I can see to write this. Something is moving beyond the second hemlock. Frightful is very alert, as if there are things all around us. Halloween was over at midnight last night, but for some of us, it is just beginning. That's how I feel anyway, but it may just be my imagination. I wish Frightful would stop pulling her feathers in and drawing herself up like a spring. I keep thinking that she feels things. Here comes Jesse C. James. He will want the venison. He didn't get the venison. There was a snarl, and a big raccoon I've never seen walked past him, growling and looking ferocious. Jesse C. stood motionless, I might say scared stiff. He held his head at an angle and let the big fellow eat. If Jesse so much as rolled his eyes, that old coon would sputter at him. It grew dark, and I couldn't see much. An eerie yelp behind the boulder announced that the red fox of the meadow was nearing. He gave me goosebumps. He strayed just beyond my store tree, weaving back and forth on silent feet. Every now and then he would cry, a wavery, owl-like cry. I wrote some more. The light from my turtle lamp casts leaping shadows. To the beech nuts has come a small gray animal. I can't make out what. Now I see it. It's a flying squirrel. That surprises me. I've never seen a flying squirrel around here, but of course I haven't been up much after sunset. When it grew too dark to see, I lit a fire, hoping it would not end the party. It did not, and the more I watched, the more I realized that all these animals were familiar with my camp. A white-footed mouse walked over my woodpile as if it were his. I put out the candle and fell asleep when the fire turned to coals. And that's it for the day. See you guys. Have a great weekend.